So I thought I'd like to speak this time a little bit about meditation. And there are as many ways to broach that subject almost as there are meditation teachers. But when we think about what it means to be fully present to our lives, to live consciously, we can start to see the connection between that way of life and the capacity to place our minds in a state that we could call meditative, but meaning that we have the ability to bring our minds into a state of full presence, and that we start to develop, some skill in maintaining awareness. And the practice of meditation really does have that effect to allow us to connect with our ability to be fully present, which in a sense is part of the process of waking up, of awakening, to really be where we are with our, with our full self. And at the same time, the quality of the awareness that we bring to bear in that moment of full presence can vary a great deal. And I think when we contemplate what it would mean to us to have a meditative practice, I think part of what we ultimately in the Buddhist path we are looking to achieve is really something that we could call self-awareness. And normally, how do we know ourselves? What is it that, that we experience as ourselves? And what do we look to know who we are? So we know, we're very social beings. A tremendous amount of the clues that we get and the cues that we get as to who we are or who we should be are environmental. They come from our family, they come from our colleagues, they come from our partner, they come from context. So that's just something to note, that the process of self-awareness, apart from all those other indications or reflections of who we are, is a whole other topic. So when we look to how we know ourselves outside of those moments of, the conversations, the way people treat us, the way we're looked at, the way we're spoken to, apart from that, how we know ourselves is primarily through our mental experiences, mental events, right? We know who we are through our thoughts. How if we think about the content of our mental experience, it's a lot of thoughts. And if you're, if you've trained academically or your teachers, there are a lot of thoughts. And there's a lot of discursive activity that we all have, no matter what walk of life. Some of the mental events that we experience are emotional in tone, or fully emotional. And as we experience them, that is the material that we observe to tell ourselves who we are, or to feel who we are, or to feel that this is who I am. And that is a little bit complicated, because the mental events that we experience, in a sense, that's the object that we're directing our attention to. What's the subject like? Who is the one who experiences our experiences? When we're focused on the content of experience, we are not focusing on the experiencer. And when we speak about, the dualistic thought or dualistic vision that within, many presentations of Buddhism is really kind of the problem, this bifurcation or the separation into subject and object is something that is extremely difficult to think beyond or to move beyond outside of meditative states, outside of moments of awareness in which we are not letting our mind kind of fuse into the thoughts or the emotions, but we also can maintain some awareness of who is this person who's experiencing this. And that ability to maintain some self-awareness of ourselves in a day-to-day situation is very, very powerful and really quite important. That we want to start changing habits. We want to respond differently. We want to be less reactive and have more, more decision-making power over our own responses. That requires us to be aware of how something is being responded to in us. We need to know when we're being triggered. We need to know when we're losing our patience. We need to know when we're tired. We need to know when we've checked out so that we can, check back in if that's what we want to do, or take more, accounting of what's going on. So the ability to kind of make contact with ourselves as the one who experiences, without having our awareness and our lives just be a series of mental events, or just be a series of experiences that we perceive and we live as something, that is kind of imposed on us or filling up our mental space, right? And so when we think about self-awareness in a way, we're thinking about, what is my mental space like? Not what do I fill it with, but what is the space inside me like? And that question is a question that we're exploring all the time in meditation. And in a sense, if we think about it, if we look at how we go through the day, we can notice that there is this constant inner dialogue, which is not necessarily a dialogue with ourselves. It's often we're, imagining, this other person, or we're responding to another situation. There's this chatter. And the chatter can be thoughts. We're thinking through, how did this work? Or we're watching a movie and then we are filling it with that content. And we go through the day more or less as children on a playground. Those, I don't know what they're called. I'm sure there's a name for them, where you have like a ladder that's horizontal, and then they grab one rung they hold on to one bar, and then, they develop the courage to let go and they grab on to the next one. And we're like that with thoughts. We don't let go, we hardly let go of a previous one before we're grabbing on to the next one. And we pass like that through our days. And what that means is that we don't have a lot of access to what's there between the thoughts or underneath the thoughts, because we're always grabbing onto them. And so meditation is kind of a way of putting our feet back on the ground and not needing to be holding on to thoughts all the time. And therefore having this opportunity to be able to see, who am I between my thoughts? Let's set aside transcending thoughts or going beyond thought. Just in those brief intervals in which one thought has concluded, what is there before the next one starts? And meditation practice, some meditation practices are really aimed at bringing us into those spaces and helping us to be aware that they exist. And finally, to be able to stay a little bit longer in those spaces each time. And this particular meditation technique that we did before this session and that we'll do again after this session, it's designed to bring us into that space even just momentarily. So in this practice, the bell is invited, or the gong is struck, and with that we initiate a period in which the sound, the vibration of sound is there. Human beings, as a species, it's sound and sight that really most holds our attention. It's much harder for us to stay focused on touch or isolate, smells and sounds. So we use smells and taste. So we use sound as something that's easy to anchor our attention. And there are lots of other objects that can also be used. The breath can also be used for this, but sound is a kind of a punchy one. So we listen to the sound as it changes. And right it can be interesting, especially if it's a nice, strong, a gong or a bell with a lovely sound. It will hold our attention for a while, and then it starts to fade. And as it starts to fade, we keep our attention there, and we're looking for that moment when that sound ends. So what we're kind of trying to learn to be aware of absence, right? We're very much focused on presence, right? What's here, what's present to our mental awareness. When we start to think about what has just left my awareness, we are inviting our consciousness to look at that gap between mental events, between thoughts. And so we really try to identify that very last moment of sound. Giving ourselves that task helps to focus the awareness, because you really want to catch it. When is it going to happen? You're very attentive to hear it happen. And then when it stops, you're letting go of the task of finding that moment. You've done it. And you rest in that awareness, which, I don't want to over-analyze it or over-talk it. It's really something that you want to start playing with, but that can open up a moment between, or help us to be aware of the moments that open up between, the spaces that open up between one mental event, before one thing that's just faded out of our awareness, and the next thing starting its cycle. Because we are, extremely good at generating new cycles. We want to just have that, take a little bit of contact with that moment at the end. And so that's just one technique that we can start to use to have some sense of what it's like to not be dominated by sense perceptions, thoughts, emotions, but really to just be and to be present. And this ability to just be, not just in some process of self-discovery, but just as a part of our lives, to just know what it's like to be fully present to ourselves, not analyzing, not thinking through something, not, trying to take mental inner inventory, just being fully present. Offering ourselves our own full awareness, not analyzing ourselves, not judging ourselves, not placating ourselves or consoling ourselves. Just offering ourselves our full presence is unbelievably powerful. And it's something that we need to learn how to do. And meditation is a way to learn how to do that. And it's, when we are starting a meditation practice or meditation session early in our time as meditators, almost immediately the first thing we notice is there's no space between thoughts. That I'm never letting go of the previous bar, before I'm already holding the other. And very often that does give us this impression that, whenever I sit down to meditate, my mind gets very active. No, your mind is very active. You just noticed it because you were paying attention. So that's always part of the first experience it's really valuable, and we shouldn't be alarmed by it, and we should really be pleased that we're having it, because that's allowing us to start to see, how does my mind work? It is active all the time. It is producing mental content. It's producing mental events, mental, affective, mental, not meaning intellectual, meaning anything that's, in our awareness. So we're doing it all the time. And yes, it is exhausting. And this is one of the benefits to meditation, is that you learn how to rest without falling asleep. And we all need to know how to rest and fall asleep at the same time. That's an important skill that over the years I have less and less ability in, sadly. But so much of the time for us, being awake means being stimulated. And so this is the other issue that we start to encounter when we initiate a meditation practice. We are reducing the effervescence of the inner stimulation. We drop outer stimulation. The phone is off, the screens are shut down, the conversations have ended, the music is off, the TV is off. So a lot of the sensory input does reduce. We lower our eyes so that we're not kind of moving around, and we keep our eyes focused or directed downwards. But the sensory input comes down, and also, we've told ourselves that we're meditating, so the production of new thoughts is a little bit less, at least the external stimuli is less. And when we do start to slow it down, and we're not having two thoughts that overlap this much, one is going down and the other is going up, it starts to be, we can kind of see one thing ending, and then there's a little bit of a pause, and then another one starts to come up. That's a good advance in meditation practice. But because we have such a strong association of stimulation with being awake, we start to get really kind of, relaxed means, okay, now time to shut down. And what a meditation is combining these two things, restfulness or relaxation and awareness. You're being conscious, being awake. And that's not an easy combination for us to really keep together for very long. So in the practice, what we're trying to do is we can be present to ourselves in a way that's open, that's attentive. And what that means is we are not imposing a lot of mental content. We're not judging, we're not analyzing, we're open, which means that there's space. The space is not already filled with our thoughts, right? So we can't be present to someone if we're thinking about what we forgot to put on our shopping list. Being really open to someone requires that we are not thinking about other things at that particular moment that we are interacting with them. We're not thinking, judgments about them, but we're also not thinking about other things. That's not being open to someone, that's just being there. So the ability to have this openness, where we have reduced, the inner discourse about the other person, and therefore we can hear what they are telling us, is a skill that's very, very powerful in all of our relationships and probably in most of our jobs as well. But the ability to do that without kind of shutting down, you kind of like the mental brightness is not there, and then you're open, but you're not really very present because you're kind of, you know, you're on that way to, a nice horizontal state. So having these two qualities together is what we really need, so that when we do start to relax, we can act in the world, we can communicate from a relaxed state. We're not, relaxation means we're, kind of closing off, we're powering down. We want to be able to maintain ourselves in a restful, non-agitated state, and also be fully present. But with the meditation practice, one of the first experiences that we can look forward to is that we start being able to experience our own presence. So whether we take the sound of the bell, whether we take our breath, whether we're taking some other object, we are attempting to give it our full presence, our full awareness, our full attention. And when our mind settles down and we start doing that for some period of time, there start to be these moments when we notice what it's like to be fully present. And what that means is we're just taking contact with our own awareness, with ourselves, with this aspect of ourselves, our mind, our luminous awareness, our consciousness, that's always present and usually only visible through its content. We're like a painter who's never seen, but whose artwork is covering all the walls. And so when we start having this kind of a mental practice, a meditation practice, which can just be watching the breath. And the breath is another object that can be used very much like the bell or the gong, where we look for the moment when the out breath, the exhalation, is that a word? Exhalation, yes? Okay. It's a word in Spanish, said slightly differently. We wait until the last moment of exhalation. We really try to find, when is that last moment? When am I no longer breathing out? And we just rest in that pause for a second. And then very naturally, we're not altering the breathing, we're just paying attention to what's happening. Then the inhalation starts, and again, at the end, we're attentive to just when do I stop inhaling? When is there no more air coming in? And just rest for a moment in that space between breaths. So the same kind of moment of discovery or of, really it's just like contacting with that experience of being in between things, right? And when you're breathing, that in between time is fixed, and it's not very short. I mean, it is very short. It's not very long. So that's a good way to start training. But the bell, because we can be as long as short in it, and we don't need to worry about, okay, am I holding my breath too long? Am I going to hyperventilate in a second? So that also has another set of advantages to doing it. But the idea the experience that we are trying to make space for is precisely this experience of just being present. And when we learn how to be present, we are inherently being present with ourselves. Being present, when we can feel what it's like to be present, we are feeling what it's like to be ourselves beyond our thoughts, beyond our mental events. And so that's just a very kind of brief way to think about what we're doing when we're meditating. Allow the sound of the bell to fill our full awareness, and look for the moment when the sound disappears, that last final moment of sound. And then when we're in that emptiness, the lack of sound, we just remain aware of the absence of sound. And as we notice other mental content replacing the absence of sound, of bell, we can just direct our attention for a few moments more to our breath. And really just maintain the natural rhythm of breathing. And just see if you can detect that moment when the exhalation ends and you're just suspended between breaths.